Because it's not just about when you die, it's also about in the event your spouse or your parent become incompetent. So what is probate court? Well, the probate court is the state taking control of your assets when you die or become incompetent. There's absolutely zero privacy about you, your family, your assets, and your debt. It can be expensive. The average cost is 5 to 20% of the value of your assets. It is time consuming. It can range from 1 to 2 years. If you've got a lot of assets, it can be way longer. If you've got a business that's operating, it can be longer and be taken over by the court receiver. And you don't have control when you're in probate court. The court controls everything and everyone that's assigned, not you. So that's the probate court. When you die or become incompetent, your assets can be taken over by the state. Now, probate court, lucky for lawyers, because most people procrastinate or they do it wrong or they try to do it themselves. It's a $1.5 billion business just for attorneys alone. Just for attorneys. It's way more than that for the whole process. Millions more go to bonding companies, appraisers, probate courts. That's where you see, at least just for you and the attorneys, it's 5 to 20% of the value of the assets. And if you own property in other states, you could be facing the same cost in the different states that you have property, because guess what? You have to go to probate court in every state that you have property or businesses. And don't forget, this isn't just about when you die. It is also when you die or when you become incompetent. Your family members don't have legal authority over your assets just because you're a spouse or a parent or a child. If you don't get the necessary paperwork in place and do it right, a lot of families, when their spouse has a stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's, they find out that they can't sell the property, they can't have access, and they got to hire a lawyer and go through probate court. The court can assign you to manage the assets, or they can assign a complete stranger. I've had family members where we go to probate court and they want to be the manager of the assets of their spouse. The court says, no, you don't know what you're doing. You have no experience in managing people's assets. We're not going to appoint you. We're going to appoint our own people. Court appointed guardian to make the daily decisions. Court appointed conservator over the assets. Court appointed lawyer to make the legal decisions, and a doctor to do the competency test. Who pays for all of that? You do. And if they don't appoint you, guess what? You're going to have to deal with all those people for the rest of the incompetent family member's life. But even if you do get appointed, you are under the strict supervision of the court. You will have to answer to the court for every single thing you do on behalf of your spouse or your parent. That's a very stressful, expensive, time-consuming process. Now, if you end up in probate court when you die, what's the order of priority with the assets? The beneficiaries, you don't get anything until everyone else is paid first. So first, if the spouse doesn't have enough to live on while the probate is pending, you can ask for emergency funds and spousal support, but you have to prove it. Otherwise, you cannot access or touch any assets. Then funeral home, medical bills, taxes, of course, IRS, secured liens, then unsecured liens, and then all the other bills that you have. Credit card bills, utility bills, anybody else that you owe money to. And then after all that is done, and you finish up paying your attorneys, then the beneficiaries get what's left after probate is completely finished. And if you got debt, there's not enough. We got to start selling off all your assets to pay off all of these 1 through 7. So you may not have a home to pass to your spouse, or you may not have properties to give to your children because it had to be sold. to pay off all of these 1 through 7. Now, what about how do you avoid probate? Well, let's look at some of these assets that are the exception to probate in some circumstances. Life insurance. If you put a beneficiary, that avoids probate court. But if you have minor children, then the probate court takes over the assets for the minor children till they turn 18, and then they give everything pile of cash to an 18-year-old with no instructions and no guidance. Now, we'll talk about a trust that you can put as a beneficiary in the event you do have a minor. But again, it does avoid probate court in most circumstances, except if you're going to name a minor as a beneficiary. So that's a big advantage of having life insurance. Your retirement accounts, again, same thing. If you put a beneficiary, it avoids probate court, except if the beneficiary is a minor. POD, payable on death, the same. You can put a beneficiary unless it's a minor. Properties that where husband and wife are on title, in most states, when one spouse dies, the other spouse inherits everything. And a trust, 100% guarantees that you'll never end up in probate court if you do it right and maintain it right. Now, let's talk about the joint ownership. The right of survivorship, first of all, doesn't give you the right of survivorship if it's an LLC or any company. So when a spouse and husband own a company together, when one dies, you don't own 100%. But those that have right of survivorship, let's talk about what happens. It doesn't solve all the problems that happen with joint ownership properties. First of all, if you've got joint ownership with children, sisters and brothers, there's no right of survivorship. When one dies, every time somebody dies on title, you got to go through probate court. But let's talk about a husband and wife, where in most states there is a right of survivorship. But does that avoid probate altogether? No, it only delays it. So let's say, hypothetical, Tom and Ann are married. Tom dies first. Anna inherits the husband's share on the property. So there's no probate to do yet. But what happens when Ann dies? Do we avoid probate at that point? Of course not. Nobody's left on title. We have to go through probate court in order for Ann's children, Tom and Ann's children, to get property free and clear. So joint ownership only delays probate court. Eventually, you will end up there. Also, joint ownership doesn't protect the assets in the event of lawsuits or remarriages for surviving spouse.